Good evening, everyone. We're about to do DAAC 1304, Chapter 6, which is the chapter on the stimulants. Actually, this is the second time I've done this today. The first recording, the sound, I didn't check the sound. And so when I got to the end of it and even posted it, the sound is horrible. So anyway, I'm trying it again. I did the sound check. If I'm going to do these things, you should be able to see me. And then when you click on the closed captioned button on the recording on YouTube, YouTube should be able to hear me too and be able to put the letters on the screen, the closed captioning, which in the last one it couldn't. So here I go again. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're going to go over and go through the chapter on the stimulants. Those are stimulants, and over here's some of the pipes and things that you'd use with them. CNS stimulants are those substances that affect the sympathetic nervous system, and because they create reactions in that system that's similar to what other natural neurotransmitters do, they're considered sympathomimetic type drugs. They alter ongoing natural neurochemical processes in the brain. That's what has to happen anytime that you're doing the drugs. For them to be psychoactive, they have to get past the blood-brain barrier into the brain and change the way things are operating there. There are a lot of different stimulants, from minor stimulants such as methylxanthines or ephedra, etc., to very, very powerful central nervous system stimulants such as ice, crystal, crack, that sort of thing. Some of the stimulants, like most drugs that we've looked at thus far, or that mankind's had experiences with, are extracted from plants. They're organic. Some have been tinkered with and had some changes made to them in a lab so that they become something else, and that's generally something a little more powerful. And they're semi-synthetic analogs. And some are totally synthetic. And consistent with the idea of synthetic drugs, when a lab technician or a scientist or something along that line, a chemist, takes the molecular structure of an organic substance and begins to tinker with it in a laboratory, then next thing you know is you have a real powerful substance. Designer drugs are a classification of drugs that have been around for a while, and they're called designer drugs because they actually came into vogue when ecstasy, Adam, Eve, that kind of thing was popping up on the scene. And designer drugs were designed to stay one step ahead of the law enforcement, so that by the time a drug was made a controlled substance, a bathtub chemist somewhere would change the molecular structure a little bit, and that controlled substance would then become a non-controlled substance, which would be generally just as effective as the drug it was derived from, if not more so. And so the designer drugs have not just been about giving the user a newer or better experience, but about, stymieing law enforcement and legal responses to the manufacture of these substances and distribution of them. Cocaine is one of these drugs that we're going to be talking about, the sympathomimetic central nervous system stimulants. And cocaine is not a new drug at all. I mean, we know for basically a fact that this was used around 5,000 years before the birth of Christ. Is an old drug. It's derived from the plant Erythroxylon coca, and it was used by the indigenous people of Central and South America and the people of the Cannibal Sea of the Caribbean. And here are some of those indigenous people over here conducting some type of transaction, and this person here is taking some of the leaves of the Erythroxylon coca out of a pouch that he tends to wear around his neck and sharing it with this person on the right. He's also got coca leaves, a coca plant stuck in his headband, so you can see them up here in his hat. Incan people who lived in Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, down in around those regions in Amazonia, Brazil, used coca leaves. They carried them around in a pouch with them, and they usually had a gourd that they also carried around that had powdered seashells in it and a stick that they chewed. For people who were using coca in this way, they would take several of the leaves out of the pouch, put it in their cheek, get the well-chewed stick that was frayed on one end, wet it up with saliva, stick it in the gourd so that the powdered seashell stuck to it, and then throw the stick up against the coca in their cheeks, and they'd chew. And the chewing action and the powdered seashells would release the cocaine hydrochloride from the coca leaves into the individual's mouth, where it would be absorbed there. He didn't necessarily have to swallow it. I'm sure he did, but it would absorb. And this, he found out that this stimulant helped him pay attention. It kept him awake. It decreased his urge to eat. It made it easier for him to breathe at high altitudes. And it gave him the same kind of rush that we might have gotten, that we might get today from some strong coffee or from a Red Bull or something along those lines. The Spanish conquistadors came to the New World, and they were just coming off a little thing. Well, they weren't coming off of it. They were still practicing at this thing in Europe called the Inquisition, where a bunch of Jesuits got together and got hyper enthusiastic about bringing Christ to the infidels. Read that, Jews, Protestants, whomever that wasn't a Catholic Christian, whether they wanted it or not. And next thing you know, you had people who were forcing their faith on other people. And when they encountered the users of cocaine, and there were plenty of them in the New World, first they tried to eliminate the practice, heavy-handedly, I might add, and brutally. But they couldn't wipe it out, so they decided to tax it. And in 1570s, it netted about $1.5 million for the Spanish crown, which was a tidy sum back then. So the regulation of coca by Spanish priests and businessmen on native people who've been using it for centuries began. This was an important drug, too. When a good Incan died, he was buried with his pouch of coca leaves around his neck and with his gourd and everything that he needed, so that when he got to the other side, wherever it is the good Incans go when they die, he'd have a stash. And that was very nice of his friends and family. Cocaine had enjoyed real popularity in the 19th century and into the 20th century in the United States as a patent medicine and as being included in tonics and things like that. These are advertisement for coca wine. Probably the most famous of those is Vin Mariani, the beverage that would make the silent eloquent and the coward brave and all this kind of good stuff. So there was that. A thing that I found interesting about the advertising is nudity, and this was in the 19th and 20th century, so I guess it was okay. I guess this is the goddess of love or something. But here's a naked lady who's standing there with her hand on her Vin Mariani, which is very phallic. Freud would have had a field day with this. And the erythroxylon coca behind her, the plant that is extracted from, and says that popes, presidents, potentates, priests, performers, and paupers all adored Vin Mariani coca wine. Over here are claims. Here's, I don't know who that is, Tarzan, I guess. But he's sitting there in his pretty naked with a animal skin draped over him and petting his lion over here. Vin Brave, the brave wine for force, and I don't know what Sante is, but vigor and beauty. So it's promising you a lot out of here. Vin des Incas, and you can see the Incan siren, who is the seductress, who is posed in the seductress pose that transcends cultures, and receiving libation and whatnot from an adoring fan over here. And I'm not sure if that's promising you sexual success or not, but I feel like maybe it is. And so you've got, and then you've got, of course, the stimulating brain tonic, Coca-Cola, the ideal brain tonic, delightful summer and winter beverage, specific for headache, relieves mental and physical exhaustion. And you've got this lovely woman sitting here at a table with her Coca-Cola cup in her hand and drinking it like tea, apparently. So there's, that. Consistent with the advertising adage that's attributed to William Randolph Hearst that give me a magazine cover with a beautiful girl, a dog, or a baby on it, and I'll give you a magazine that sells. National Lampoon tried that formula in January 1977. Pretty girl, baby, dog, and it didn't matter what the context was. This is one of their one of their best-selling magazines was this cover. Their second best-selling magazine cover also featured a dog on it. But back to drugs. Cocaine, right? Right. And these busy little guys that are out there, look at them build that house. Go, kids, go. Wonder if cocaine had anything to do with it. But cocaine toothache drops were an instantaneous cure. And cocaine is a good topical anesthetic, and it does work for toothaches and other kind of pains that you may have. Very expensive, too. Cocaine toothache drops were 15 cents. And this was in the late 1800s, right around the turn of the 20th century. 10 cents was a lot of money back in them days, right? There are pharmaceutical uses for cocaine and derivatives. One that jumps immediately to mind, Solarcaine, the sunburn medication. And Solarcaine has some stuff in it. It's got some medicated oils and things like that moisturize the burn and do all of that and help out there. But the main thing that solarcaine brings to the table, as far as that goes, is the topical anesthesia effect. If you ever snorted cocaine, and I'm not going to ask you for a show of hands because I couldn't see them anyway, but if you've ever snorted cocaine, your face gets numb, your nose gets numb, and you can't, you don't feel it properly. And that's the same thing that the same type of relief that solarcaine provides you. You see this lady over here with this satisfied look on her face because she's getting this sprayed on her back. And that spray is cold and that spray is wet, and that will make the sunburn feel great in and of its own. I mean, you get that kind of effect with water. But the thing that solarcaine brings to the table in there is lidocaine, which is a key ingredient of solarcaine. And it basically deadens nerve endings in the skin so that you're not getting pain signals from the injured area, the burn areas. It's not sending pain signals to the brain. And that's quite a relief. It doesn't last for a real long time. It wears off after a while. So you have to, reintroduce it. And it's a spray. You don't have to rub it. Pretty cool. So sunburn cream, spray, lotions, they all work pretty much the same way with that. This topical anesthesia effect makes it an effective anesthesia for nasal, for ophthalmic, or for laryngeal surgery. If you get something in your eye and you go to the doctor, he's probably going to put some deadening eye drops in your eye, and those deadening eye drops will be of a cocaine derivative. Used to, and that's changed somewhat over the years because they've come up with new types of synthetics that work better without the side effects of intoxicative rushes and things like that. But once upon a time, when you go to the dentist, they'd put a topical anesthesia on a Q-tip, stick it in your mouth, rub it around up there till your gums got numb, and then they'd bring out this ginormous needle and inject more of it deeper into your face, and your face gets numb, and you can't feel anything, and they can remove teeth and drill and fill and everything that dentists do. You also found cocaine and derivatives in hemorrhoid cream. When you insufflate the cocaine, when you snort it into your nose, it is absorbed through wet membranes in the sinus cavity and into the bloodstream, and it has its effect as it circulates through the bloodstream. But if you've snorted cocaine, again, not a show of hands, but your sinus passage is open and you can breathe better for that period of time. Now later you may have issues with that because of the irritant effect that cocaine has at the same time as it's creating an anesthesia response with the tissue. But that is to be expected. So if you have hemorrhoids, wet tissue, inflamed tissue, painful tissue, and you put the cocaine-based cream on there, the tissue shrinks up, the hemorrhoids become smaller, they don't hurt as much, and I don't know, maybe you feel good about yourself due to some secondary effect there as well. Cocaine has also been used in psychiatric interventions, particularly with people who are alcohol inebriates or something along those lines, right? Sigmund Freud wrote a few papers on how cocaine could be used against depression and to intervene upon substance addictions. Cocaine, the illegal substance, became prominent in the United States once it became illegal, and it became illegal in the early part of the 20th century, around the time of the Jazz Age and Prohibition and the Roaring Twenties is when cocaine really was experiencing some popularity and some notoriety as well. Speedballing became a thing around that time, injecting cocaine and heroin mixed together so that you'd get a narcotic effect, which is depressive, and a cocaine effect, which is stimulant at the same time, and you kind of roller coast through that high. The Negro cocaine fiend became a thing. Dr. Edward Huntington wrote a paper insisting that murder and insanity increasing among lower class blacks because they've taken to sniffing over in their part of town, N-word town, and he didn't shy away from that either. Arguments were made in the Congress of the United States of America around this time that cocaine sniffing promoted the rape of white women by black men, and it helped to get the Harrison Act over the top in 1914. Cocaine was definitely linked to racist policies in the United States and racist laws, which sure is a good thing we don't do that anymore, right? Yeah, right, except we do. Cocaine has been at various times considered a mild and relatively harmless stimulant on up into through the 70s and into the 80s. There were people, even medical people, who believed that. And then it was viewed as the most heinous drug ever to emerge on the American scene, as it was in the 90s with the crack epidemic, late 80s and into the 90s, to the crack epidemic and crack babies and all that kind of good stuff. In truth, the drug is neither harmless nor is it the most heinous drug ever to appear on the American scene. There are a number of forms of illegal cocaine that it may take. Cocaine hydrochloride is extracted from the leaves of Erythroxylon coca. If you watch Pablo Escobar, Patron del Mal, the Colombian narco soaps on Univision and Spanish-speaking TV, you'll see a lot of storylines that involve people harvesting cocaine out in the jungles and turning it into harvesting the leaves and turning it into cocaine. And it's a relatively easy process. You have on hand some Erythroxylon coca growing. When it's big enough, you pull the leaves off of it, and you take it and put it into a child's wading pool or a horse trough or something like whatever will hold liquid, and you'll put a nice layer of leaves on the bottom of it, and then you'll pour a petroleum product on it, like benzene or kerosene or something like that. And the petroleum product will cause the leaves to break down, and as the leaves break down, a scum forms on top of the water, on top of the liquid, and that I'm gonna have to. Okay, I'm sorry, I got distracted. My car I heard the horn beep outside. That scum that rises to the top is your raw cocaine. You pull it off of there, and it begins to dry a little bit, and it turns into coca paste. Coca paste is used as an intoxicant on its own down in South and Central America. but not so much in the northern and North America and up through Mexico, not so much. You can take this coca paste, smear it on a cigarette, put it in a piece of paper, put it on some tin foil, whatever you want to do, very much like you can with the cocaine sulfate crack, and apply heat to it, and it vaporizes. It turns into a gas, and you inhale the gas, and that's what gets you high. Cocaine sulfate is crack, and that's another derivative, another product. You basically, when you produce crack, you take the impurities out. Something that happens with illegal cocaine is you have no pharmaceutical controls over it. No one is doing any kind of quality control to make sure that you have a certain purity or a certain percentage, certain proof of cocaine out there. And all along the way, as cocaine changes hands and changes hands and changes hands on its way north, everybody who touches it stomps it, cuts it with something else. That's to say, dilutes it, so it becomes a larger volume of product, and larger volumes of product equal more money, right? So that's how that works. Crack is pre-based base. Freebase is a process that people used to do here in the United States when they would, when crack was not available. It wasn't a product that was on the streets as of that time in the early to mid 80s, late 70s, early to mid 80s. And if you wanted crack, you had to make your own, and you could extract cocaine through a extraction process called freebasing that involved ether or some other volatile solvent, which was dangerous. It could blow up, you could catch on fire, a la Richard Pryor, stuff like that. But there's also a technique where you can put your cocaine into boiling water with baking soda, and the base cocaine, the sulfate, will fall away and settle in the pot, and that's your freebase. Pretty handy, huh? And it's a more potent form of cocaine because it's a more pure form of cocaine, because when you base it, you get rid of the stomp, the impurities that they put in there. Cocaine is really an intriguing drug when you start looking at it pharmaceutically. It does a whole bunch of things, and a lot of them are not really clearly understood. We know they have that it has presynaptic effects. It stimulates the release of neurotransmitters. It keeps them out in the synapse longer, causes them to bind longer, have a stronger effect, blocks the reuptakes of neurotransmitters, forces them out into the synapse longer, and depletes levels of dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. Remember that shark named MAO in a lecture, I think it was the last one or the one before, where monoamine oxidase is an enzyme that lives out in the synapse, and it gobbles up dopamine and serotonin, norepinephrine, and things like that. And when those levels deplete to a certain extent, then you have depressions. And these depressions occur with both acute and chronic uses of cocaine, as both an acute condition and as a chronic condition, rather. And there are even more complex interactions with multiple neurotransmitters that include dopamine, serotonin, GABA, glutamate, and the things that they do and how they relate with one another in complex neurotransmission processes. So cocaine does a bunch of things, and we also know that in the process of metabolization, if you're using cocaine and drinking, then a third substance is produced, cocaethylene or coconol, that is as more powerful really than either of the parent drugs. Is a very active metabolite in its own right and powerful drug in its own right, but it's in a smaller dosage than you would they're in a reduced amount. There's not as much of it there as when you first took the drugs together. Cocaine has a rapid onset. It doesn't take long to get you off. Whether you're snorting it, whether you're shooting it, or whether you're smoking it, which are the common ways of doing the drug. It hits you fast. It hits you hard. It produces a really intense high. And I've heard a lot of clients who've used this drug speak of it in rhapsodic and sexual terms, that the cocaine rush is like having an orgasm. It's a short duration. It doesn't last long. So your high is beginning to wear off about 15, 20 minutes after you did it, and it's gone for, in a half hour. So if you want to keep that buzz going, you have to keep bumping, throughout the period of partying. Typically, cocaine users tend to binge with this stuff. It's a powerful reinforcement for continued use. Short-acting, short-duration drugs have a relatively, particularly if they produce intense highs, have a relatively high addiction potential and abuse potential. Coke is also unique among the stimulants, as in with most stimulants, it's awfully hard to overdose. You have to almost intentionally be trying to do yourself injury, to create a toxic situation by eating too much diet pills, eating too many diet pills, or doing too much meth, or what have you. But not so much with cocaine. The overdoses with cocaine are often fatal, and they usually result from heart attacks because of the effect of cocaine on the heart muscle. And Dr. Carl Barabee, who at one time was the clinical director of the New York State Substance Abuse Services back a while back, long while back actually, said that using cocaine chronically is like going out to the driveway and starting your car and leaving it in park, but pressing the accelerator to the floor for hours. And it's going to blow your engine. It's going to create a bunch of problems with your vehicle. And the same is true with the cocaine user. Cocaine also produces depression with both acute and chronic use. Binging overnight on cocaine will leave you tomorrow morning with depression. Binging on cocaine on a more frequent basis creates a state of depression where you have an anhedonic state, where you have an inability to feel pleasure. You can't feel good because you don't have the neurochemicals left to feel good with because of the effect of cocaine and the depletion of these substances. When you do a couple of lines, you're all dressed up and no place to go. The body's in a physiological state of panic. You have triggered the fright, fight, flight response in the sympathetic nervous system. We could produce the same effect by calling our boy Leatherface over here and having him saw his way into your bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that unannounced. Your body would experience something that's roughly akin to a cocaine rush, except for one thing. While you're doing the cocaine rush, even though your body's in this same physiological state of panic as it would be if Leatherface were after you, your brain's telling you, this is great. We got to do this some more. I can't wait, to do another line. Because pleasure centers in the prefrontal cortex are being triggered, and it feels real good. So some treatment implications. Cocaine users tend to binge. There's not a tremendous risk with someone who's been binging with cocaine and they make it to you alive. There's not a real risk of there going to be a dangerous withdrawal associated with it. Cocaine doesn't really produce a dangerous withdrawal. But because of the fact that cocaine, you're not going to maintain a high and you have to keep bumping it, that does create a state where you could accidentally overdose yourself and die. So there's frequency of use, and that frequency of use creates habituation. People get used to doing it, and they crave doing it. They look forward to doing these bumps. And this complicates the process of sobriety, of detoxification, particularly when the phenomena of craving is kicking in. And because of that depression that we talked about differently, we talked about with both acute and chronic states, is that you're going to be working with someone, whatever else can be said about the cocaine addict in your office, is they're sitting across from you, they're depressed, and they don't feel good. And they can't feel good because they don't have any feel-good chemicals there to work with. Cocaine users with high dosages over protracted periods of time also develop psychotic features. They see things that people don't see and hear things that people don't hear, and they become delusional and they hallucinate. And there's another phenomenon called formication or paresthesias. That's sometimes referred to as coke bugs. They can feel insects crawling under their skin, and this has to do with hyper stimulation of the central nervous system. There are no insects crawling under your skin, but you feel them. So you might dig out your penknife or straighten out a paper clip and go exploring for bugs. And people do themselves harm doing that. The depletion of neurochemicals in the depressed mood. I found this picture, I just liked it. I'm thinking these are the neurochemicals. Serotonin, GABA, norepinephrine, dopamine, that are no longer there. They've flown the coop, and consequently there are fewer of them left inside here to do what all of these are supposed to have been doing, which is mood regulation. And because you don't have the neurochemicals for mood regulation, you can't regulate, and you're depressed, sometimes for significant periods of time. Generally speaking, if you've got someone in the hospital, you can manage this fairly well. If you're working with someone on an outpatient basis, it can become more of a challenge, because all they know that to feel better, they've got to go do some more cocaine, or they've got to write it out. So which do you think usually wins? Yeah, right. That's what usually wins. Amphetamine and methamphetamine, a different kind of stimulant. This is a movie poster from a 1967 film called Valley of the Dolls. I was 17 when this came out, and fell in love with all of these women. But anyway, it's about 4 women in Los Angeles and New York who were addicted to prescription medication, and particularly diet pills. And they called these, you can see that each of these women's encapsulated in a little pill. And the pills were called dolls, and the women were called dolls. So Valley of the Dolls had a double entendre with it. And this is what someone else might call the eating speed, diet pills that you'd see over here. And that's a source for legal amphetamine, and they can still be prescribed and are still prescribed for certain conditions. These CNS stimulants are based, the amphetamines are synthetics, but they're based on the molecular structure of ma huang. And this is the ephedra plant. And this is the ephedra plant from which ma huang is extracted. Ephedrine is extracted. Ma huang is the herb stuff. And you may run across this. You'll see, if you look at you remember those little power pack things you used to get at the convenience store? They'd be sitting at the counter. Pick me up, energy pills, boost pills, diet pills. They would have ma huang in it, advertised as a Chinese herb. It's not really a herb, but it is used in herbal medicine. It's found in over-the-counter concoctions. It's found in prescription meds. One of its main uses is as a bronchial dilator. You might find it in those little asthma sprays that people carry around with them when they are having trouble breathing to be a rescue inhaler or what have you. Ephedrine is found in those. Another common minor stimulant that's found in there is theophylline, which is also it's a xanthine stimulant. It's also the primary stimulant that you find in tea. Which is another reason that tea helps you breathe better as well. These dilate bronchial passages, the airway's open, you can get air in better, you can get air out better, and everything's swell. Amphetamine is a synthetic substance. It's based on the molecular structure of ephedrine. But since it's synthetic, what do we know about synthetics? Absolutely. If you synthesize something, you usually make it stronger. The synthetic is stronger than whatever it is synthesized from. Amphetamine's been around a long time in the 20th. It's been around all throughout the 20th century. It was used by the Axis powers, Germany and Japan during World War II, to increase energy levels of their soldiers, to keep them awake longer, fight better, etc., and so forth. And kind of used as a PED, a performance-enhancing drug. But it's not really. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It was used by astronauts in the Mercury and Gemini programs in the early days of the space race by the United States. So if we have our astronauts out there, in orbit for a few days, and they've got to come back into the Earth's atmosphere. Then before they pilot the spacecraft back in, an hour or so before they're supposed to hit the Earth's atmosphere, they might eat a couple of black beauties, which will snap them too. Why they call them snappers too, right? And increase their concentration, reaction time, make it easier for them to do what they need to do, even if they've been exhausted by days in space. What do they do? Clinical applications. There are three key situations, diagnoses, circumstances that these drugs are used to correct. One of them is narcolepsy, and that's this young man here. People who are narcoleptic have a hard time staying awake. They fall asleep real quick. They fall asleep without warning. They're hard to rouse sometimes. And it's not a matter of not being interested in what's going on, like this poor dude. It's a physiological issue, and he may have slept well last night, etc. Just you fall asleep at unexpected times, and as you can see from the looks of everyone around them, they don't quite know what to make of this. This can not a lot of people have this. It's not a really common condition to find in the population overall, but it does occur, and for the people who have it, it is a real problem. You fall asleep while you're working, while you're driving, while you're in the middle of sex. There's no time where you can't fall asleep. A treatment for this condition is administration of stimulants, and stimulants will keep you from falling asleep. However, that's in the daytime. What happens when it's nighttime and your stimulants are still working and you have to go to sleep, but you can't now? That's where the depressant hypnotics are used in the evening. So you kind of live your life with a chemical alarm clock of taking pills to help you sleep at night and taking pills to keep you awake during the day. It's not the most optimum way to live, maybe, but it is a way to live and to get stay involved with life and to function in a fairly normal way. Another clinical situation that they're prescribed for short-term weight reduction. Weight's a problem. There's lots of Americans, American adults and American children who suffer from obesity. They're overweight. I'm overweight, not a whole lot, but according to my age and my BMI and all that stuff, I should be at least 15 or 20 pounds lighter than I am. A lot of times the issue of being overweight has to do with perception, and it may be society's problem more than it is the individuals looking at that. But short-term weight reduction can be achieved with these dolls, but it's not a good long-term plan. And it's not a good long-term plan because behavior is not particularly addressed. You're just relying on a pharmaceutical. And there are a couple of problems wrong with relying on a pharmaceutical, and being addicted is probably one of the key ones, getting strung out on it and feeling that you have to have it all the time. Another is that you build a tolerance, and that happens all the time with addiction. Tolerance changes. But tolerance changes, if you're taking a substance, taking X amount of a substance to get Y amount of a behavioral response, over time you have to start doing 2X and 3X and 4X to get where just X used to take you, because that tolerance builds up. So you build a tolerance to the effect of the drugs, the desired effects, the appetite suppressant aspect of it, and the pleasurable effects, the type of feelings that you get from taking that drug that makes you want to continue. And that's not good. And when you stop taking the medications, and this is probably one of the things that really freaks people out the most with doing weight reduction with pills and appetite suppressants and things like that, is once you stop taking them because you haven't addressed anything else in terms of a plan of recovery, regulation, or what have you. You haven't learned to be a self-conscious eater, to pay attention to what you eat and what amount, and you're not a regular exerciser, then chances are pretty good that you're going to put the weight on as quickly as you lost it, or maybe even more quickly than you lost it. Believe it or not, dear hearts, a number of people in recovery, and in particular women, because in our society, we're harder on women about their weight than we are on men. Face it, we're kind of sexist that way. Women will relapse because they put on a few pounds and they don't want to be fat. You can take your cocaine and know that will help you stay skinny. And then treatment of ADHD, and there's some mixed reviews on that. When you use stimulants such as methylphenidate or Adderall on people who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, then those individuals are able to be more discretionary about the stimulus that they're taking in. A problem with ADHD, and I'm not a doctor and I'm not coming at you from a physician standpoint, is that there's so much stimulation that's coming in that people who have this can't screen it out. And if you watch kids who are diagnosed with ADHD, they can't finish coloring a picture in a coloring book. They can't sit still and concentrate that long. They can't watch a cartoon on TV. They can't sit still and focus that long. They can't play games with their friends because they can't control their impulses, etc. And if you give them Adderall or methylphenidate or something like that, it does help. And you can see the change, and you can see that people are then able to concentrate better. But you're also medicating a condition with these children, and there's tends to be a reliance on the drug as you get older. There are studies that have been done, and they come down on both sides of the issue. Some studies say that people who use methylphenidate, etc., as children have an increased likelihood of becoming drug addicts as they get older, and certainly among the recovery population, people with ADHD are well represented. And there are others who say no, that these drugs didn't really cause that, but people gravitated toward their addiction to alleviate the symptoms that these drugs would address. There's also the issue, particularly with boys who are the ones who are most diagnosed with ADHD, and particularly if they start it younger, there's the issue of stunted growth, and there are some pretty damning studies out there that indicate that early introduction of Ritalin, methylphenidate, into a child's life can cause them to be physically stunted. A third thing is more environmental than anything else. Kids who have access to methylphenidate or some other amphetamine-like substance can suddenly become real popular kids at school because that's a good source for their buddies to get stimulant drugs and do a little lightweight junior high speeding about, right? Then there are the illegal drugs, and they're running around out there, and you can hear them. Generally speaking, you talk about methamphetamine when you hear these terms: speed, crystal, ice, meth, crank, shit. Is about the crystal meth. And you can smoke it, you can shoot it, you can snort it. There are plenty of ways to do this substance. And it has a fairly quick onset, pretty quick onset, like cocaine does. It's got an intense rush associated with it. But unlike cocaine, it doesn't wear off in just a little while. I mean, you people who are doing speed can do this for hours, without having to take another bump. Doesn't mean they won't take another bump, but they can go for hours without having to. In the 60s and 70s, they came up with the slogan, and one of the anti-drug things, that speed kills. And this little guy began to emerge. This is Speedy Alka-Seltzer. He was the slogan for Alka-Seltzer at the time was pop, pop, fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is. Alka-Seltzer. Put a couple of those in a glass of water and swill it down, and whatever's bothering you won't bother you in a little while. Your headache, your upset stomach, whatever it is. Speed does kill, but not directly. People don't overdose from speed and die. They may die from impurities that were in the speed. You get a bad batch. There is no pharmaceutical control. If you're sharing needles, you run a real risk of bloodborne pathogens and spreading illnesses like AIDS and hepatitis C. Bathtub speed can be dangerous, again, because of the purity. People who take high doses for protracted periods of time get psychotic, and that can create problems. We don't call them speed freaks and meth monsters for nothing, and if they're running around armed and crazy, bad stuff could happen. And then there are designer drugs, and designer drugs, as I mentioned before, we've kind of already talked about them, are the ones that are tinkered with to stay ahead of law enforcement in terms of regulated and unregulated substances. So amphetamine and meth both has a rapid onset, lengthy duration. It increases concentration in the short haul. That's why an astronaut might want to take it an hour or so before he re-enters the atmosphere. He can pay attention and react better. But the longer you take it, it decreases concentration and it decreases your ability to perform tasks. People who have taken stimulants, whether it's minor stimulants or major stimulants, same thing when, eating no-dose and washing it down with Mountain Dew, trying to learn a semester's worth of material in 2 days at the end of the semester. You may stay up longer, you may read the book longer, but you don't retain better. In fact, you retain worse. And you may have the experience that while you're doing all of this, you've read the same page over 10 times already and you still don't comprehend or remember what it says. People who do high dosages of stimulants tend to lose their concentration. I was working in pushing a crew up in Wyoming back in the early 80s and doing lots of cocaine at the time. And I was sitting there at my desk and I had a stainless steel plate with several rails of coke out on it, and it was behind my prints and up against the window, so that if someone came in, I just set my hard hat over it and they couldn't see it, hidden, smart, huh? But I would stand up and turn around and take 3 steps over to the print rack because it occurred to me that I needed to punch out something in the pipe rack. And by the time I did that, I forgotten what I stood up for. And that's not uncommon with people who do this drug. Or it may occur to us sometimes while we're on a speed run. It is important to know how many raisins are actually in 2 scoops of raisin, which are in Kellogg's Raisin Bran, right? And there's only one way to know that, and that's take them out and count them. And if X amount of raisins equals 2 scoops of raisins, how many bran flakes do you got to have 2 scoops of bran flakes? And should this little one count as half of one, or should it count as a whole one? How do you count those? Inquiring minds want to know. So your thinking gets very, very flaky as you continue to use speed. And there are studies done, and we have people that are into industrial hygiene and safety and stuff on campus right now who are majoring in this kind of thing, who can tell you that after 8 hours, 8 hours is the optimum time for you to work. That's, you can concentrate, you can pay attention, your productivity is good. After 8 hours, it gets a little bit iffy. 10 hours, not so bad. You won't lose much. 12 hours, what you're losing in terms of ability to concentrate and produce becomes more pronounced. After 12 hours, your productivity, concentration, ability to work safely, and all that stuff falls totally off the damn table. And this is whether you're doing drugs or not. Now, if you're doing drugs to keep going, which is something that we used to do back in my misspent youth when I worked construction, working at the Alcoa aluminum plant in Point Comfort, Texas, I walked in the gate on a Monday. And I didn't walk out again for 36, 37, 38 hours. I forget which after that. So it was, fairly well into almost Wednesday before I left. And I told my boss, man, I got to go home. I got to get a shower and sleep. I'm just out of it. And he took me to the office and he sat me down. He said, "You can come in here and nap if you need to." And I said, "Well, I don't." And we'll get you when we need you. And I said, "Well, I don't know, man. I really think I ought to go home and get like 8 hours." And he said, "Look, dude, we don't have anyone else. You got to be here." And I said, "I don't know if I can stay awake." He said, "Well, sleep in here. And if you can't pick up," he opened his desk drawer, took out a bottle of pills, and opened it up and handed me a half dozen and said, "Eat one of these." And I did. And it was like, get out of the way. I'm going to build me a plant. But that's risky business, even though it was very common. And this was back in the 70s, when my boss wasn't giving me a urine test; he was giving me the speed. So it was pretty common. There's not much risk of an overdose with that, but there is real risk of causing accidents and being cavalier with safety standards, that kind of thing. So there's risk with that. These drugs pose clinical implications in treatment, inasmuch as when we get these guys, acute intoxication may feature violent behavior, hallucinations. They're hearing and seeing things that aren't there, and emotionally labile and easy to trigger. And as I said, they're not referred to as speed freaks and meth monsters for nothing. But when they're coming off of it, we have depression, where people just don't feel good, they're not motivated, they're moody, angry people, quick to anger, that sort of thing. They're lethargic, they don't want to move, don't want to do anything, want to sleep all the time, and they have strong cravings. Because, again, they've got depleted neurochemicals, the neurochemicals that's necessary for them to feel good, etc. In conclusion, stimulant drugs are often abused, and they're abused in a lot of ways. People do become addicted to these substances, but it was tempting for people to discount that addiction because the withdrawal syndromes from stimulants are not nearly as dramatic as withdrawal from alcohol or the other CNS depressants or the narcotic substances or whatever. They exist, these withdrawals, but they're not life-threatening. They are sobriety threatening because they can be you can feel very miserable while this is going on. And the tendency then is, to go get a line or two of something that will make you feel a lot better. Because there are medical uses, some people who are introduced to these substances are introduced to them through prescriptions that they get from God's own right hand, right? Their general practitioner, their physician. Most people who use these substances do not become addicted to them, but for those who do become addicted to them, the addiction is as real and as difficult as any other addiction that you might find. And I think that's all I want to say about this. And by saying that's all I want to say about this, I might add that that's not all there is to say. There's plenty of other stuff we could say about the stimulants, and we may touch back on that again in another chapter or two. But meth is a big problem, and we manufacture a lot of meth in Texas. I don't know where we are now. I'm remiss in keeping up with DEA stats, but forever and a day, Texas was the #1 meth-producing state in the United States. I mean, we cooked it here, baby, and we distributed it to the rest of the world. So there was never a shortage of methamphetamine in our state. And meth people, there's some issues with production. For instance, people now are doing mobile meth labs, and I think maybe they got this idea from Walter White and Breaking Bad, but who will go to a motel room or rent a house and start cooking meth in it, and they'll be there for a week or two and cook up a good supply of meth, and then they'll move on. But there's a lot of dangerous chemicals involved in methamphetamine production, and it stinks. And the fumes of meth production are toxic and dangerous, and people can and do die from breathing waste and breathing fumes from meth production. If you cook your meth in a motel room, that motel room becomes a toxic waste site, basically speaking. If you do it in a house or a mobile home or an apartment or something along those lines, then you've also created a toxic waste site or toxic environment. In Galveston, I think it was around 2 years ago, someone was cooking meth in a motel room and their child died from breathing fumes from that production. Safety rules and stuff are not always followed when you do that. And meth labs blow up. They explode and they set people on fire and they blow out walls and things like that. So there are other risks involved. Anyway, you can read some other things in your book around this chapter, and I think I had put some. I think I had done a better job of explaining it in an earlier video, but that earlier video didn't come out very well, so I had to do it over again, and I'm tired. So that's it for today, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.